Good morning. My name is Steve Linscomb, and I'm with the USA Rice Federation. And this morning, we're going to present the Missouri Rice Research and Outlook Report. These presentations are very different this year. They're normally made during the Rice Outlook Conference, which is held about this time each year in various locations throughout the United States. But since we were not able to have an in-person Rice Outlook Conference this year, we felt that these research for all the Rice states, these research and Outlook presentations were extremely important. And to provide this information to you, we're doing these virtually this year. This morning, again, we will have the Missouri Production and Research and Outlook Report. We're very happy to have this sponsored by Riceland Foods this morning. And again, very appreciative of Riceland for sponsoring the Missouri reports. I would make you aware that at any time you have a question during the report this morning, there is a Q&A icon down at the bottom of your screen. If you just want to type in the question, I'll get it to Dr. Aid, and we'll get you a response. These reports will also be available. We're recording them. They will be available on the USA Rice YouTube website probably early next week, and we'll make that information available to you. So our guest this morning is Dr. Michael Aid. He is a soil scientist in the Department of Agriculture at Southeast Missouri State University in Cape Girardeau. Michael got his BS in chemistry and mathematics at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He got his PhD in agronomy, soil chemistry at Mississippi State. He is responsible for teaching soils, soil fertility, and a capstone course in crop production. And he has been very closely affiliated with the Missouri rice industry and the Missouri Rice Research and Merchandising Council for 35 years. So Michael, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. And I also want to thank Riceland Foods for sponsoring this. It is critical that across the states of the Rice Belt that we share information so that all of our citizens who grow rice will prosper. And so I want to thank Riceland Foods. Thank you. Today, I'm going to talk about, put up my share screen here. And I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'd like to present on the Missouri Rice Research and Outlook. I hope that that is now visible to you all. So let me just start.
Michael, you might want to do it in presentation mode.
Okay, help me out there. What does that mean?
Hit that icon at the bottom, maybe, where it's just the screen is each one of your slides instead of having the slides on the left-hand side.
Oh, I got you. All right. Okay, is that better?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, good. So what I desire is just give you a brief overview of what the agriculture is like in southeastern Missouri, because we're not the entire state of Missouri in terms of rice. We're only 6 or 7 counties in that lower southeast corner. And I just very briefly want to go over some of the corn and soybean production and so forth to give you a view of what the agriculture is like in very southeastern Missouri. Corn production. I have the various counties that I call Southeast Missouri and the Boot Hill. And I think the total value of Missouri corn is about 214 million. For the state, it's almost 2 billion. And so corn is a growing attribute in southeastern Missouri. When I first came here, virtually no one grew corn, but it has grown substantially. And I think part of that, people are growing corn to get ahead of the market pressures from when the rest of the state comes in. And as Steve said, if you have any questions, please ask. So soybean. Soybean is the largest acreage crop in very southeastern Missouri. Total value is almost 400 million. In the state, it's 2 billion. There is a lot of acreage in soybean production. I'm still thinking the yields are a little low for what it actually ought to be, but soybean production got off to a lousy start this year simply because of the heavy spring rains. People got planted. That's true with corn. That's true with rice. And so we had an issue this year with getting everything planted on time. Now, I don't have 2020 data because it's not yet available. So this is the latest data that I have is 2019. Wheat production, 42, almost $43 million worth of production value in southeastern Missouri. And Missouri itself is about 127 million. Not necessarily a significant crop, but it's one of the top 5. Cotton production is increasing. The value is about 283 million. But you can see that the trend is cotton production has started to increase dramatically. And there are some reasons for that. Part of that's market conditions. Part of it is new technology, new genetic concepts, and things of that nature. So cotton seems to be rebounding across the state of Missouri, at least in southeastern Missouri. And lastly, rice, 2019. We had $152 million value, but you can see that was 173,000 acres. I did talk to Dave Reinbott, who's MU, University of Missouri economist, and he says it's now up to, for 2020, it was 210,000. And so there is a rebound in rice acreage also. Some of that acreage would have been higher had it not been for the untimely and long-term spring rains that we had that prevented a lot of people of getting out of switching to soybeans. So both cotton and rice seem to be on an upward trend across southeastern Missouri. Now, what I did, this is unique to Missouri, and it's probably also appropriate for you. I went irrigation by crop by county and also for southeastern Missouri. And what I wanted to impress upon you is in Missouri, down there in the corner, 15% of the acreage across Missouri is irrigated by some fashion, where in southeastern Missouri, it is 60, and some people think that that's a higher number, right? And if you look by county, Cape Girardeau County is more of a Midwest kind of agriculture, more of a cow-calf operation with a lot of heavy livestock, where the other counties are more or less traditional Mid-South agriculture with more of the plant agriculture and less of the animal agriculture, except for some poultry. But you can see that there is a great deal of irrigated land all across southeastern Missouri. And that is actually true when we come to rice, but also cotton, soybeans, and corn, and some other crops as well. So there is a high degree of irrigation capacity all across southeastern Missouri. Now, why is that important? If the state of Missouri takes a look at their water laws, and there's a great deal of work by DNR looking at water across the state of Missouri, simply because northern Missouri is in a water deficit. We've had a drought, we've had excessive rain periods, so water relations are becoming increasingly important in Missouri. And the real problem is north I-70 up towards Iowa, where there's a water deficit. But southeastern Missouri is so unique that our water is almost inexhaustible. And therefore, our hydrology and our geology of our 6 counties here is so uniquely different that we want to make sure that when Missouri does rewrite its water laws, that we are giving allowances for our geologic and hydrological uniqueness. And so there's a lot of interest in looking at irrigation and so forth, all across southeastern Missouri. So I wanted to go into some of the rice research. I've been working with furrow irrigated rice for many years now, and we're looking at a performance evaluation for 2020. And yet we've been doing this design for several, 4 or 5 years now. And what we've done is this kind of a diagram of a field layout that we did. And so this year, what we were doing is looking more or less at mid-season nitrogen on row rice. And I have here zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. Zone 1 is the closest to where the polypipe is spread. And so this is the 1/3 of the field that is row rice, but the water is coming in from the polypipe. Zone 2 is the middle portion. It is also row rice. It's a graded field. And zone 3 is towards the end, and we do get some tailwater accumulation down here in zone 3. Now, I do want to impress upon you that these are rather large plots. Zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3 each are over 300 feet long for the plots. And so this is well over 1,000 feet in length. So it's a true farm size evaluation of row rice. And we have a border. We put down 45 pounds of N. That's at mid-season, at internode elongation, 60, 75, 90 pounds of N. And then we had untreated check where we did not put down nitrogen as mid-season. And so what we did is we're looking at, is there a difference across the field when it comes to row rice? And we find that in the last 3 or 4 years that we've done this, that there is a big difference in row rice across the field. Now, we did some mid-season tissue analysis. This was about a couple of weeks after we put down the mid-season nitrogen treatment. And you can see for nitrogen that in the control where we did not add mid-season nitrogen treatment, we had just shy of 2% N, where the mid-season, where they did receive the mid-seasons, this would be the 30, the 45, and so forth, you had a bounce in the nitrogen content. And then on zone 2, we see exactly the same thing. And then on zone 3, which is where you start getting tailwater, we see less of a bounce of N. Phosphorus is pretty normal. K is pretty normal. We do see that there is some interactiveness between K and N. Where we put down N, we got higher rates of K, kind of a synergistic uptake. And most of the other elements are kind of normal, or at least they're not inherent for the growth of the rice. Now, at the harvest, we did a rough rice seed analysis. You can see that in seed, for the zone 1, 2, and 3, the nitrogen kind of evened out in the seed. That's kind of to be expected. Same way with the phosphorus, the same way with the potassium, magnesium, and calcium. They were all fairly standardized, and there wasn't showing a lot of variation whether they received nitrogen or their position within the field. However, we did do arsenic. We measured arsenic on the rough rice. And we do see that where we had tailwater accumulation, which is more like a delayed flood situation, if you will, that the arsenic content went up relative to the true row rice situations. And so that is still an issue that we're trying to figure out, trying to maintain, keep arsenic out of the rice. But row rice definitively reduced the level of arsenic compared to zone 3, which was more like the traditional delayed flood, in that you had some tailwater accumulation. And so we've done arsenic work now for several years. We've done it across various varieties. We had a couple of years where we looked at a dozen varieties, and going to row rice reduced a lot of the rough rice seed arsenic levels, which is total arsenic, to about 0.05 part per million, where the corresponding delayed flood was about 0.24 part per million. And so some of the row rice was actually suitable for baby food, which is, some producers are thinking of looking at that as reattracting the baby food market. And so some of the Missouri representatives have reached out to places like Kellogg's and so forth to have a discussion about row rice as being appropriate for the baby food industry. Now, we did weigh the panicle weights, and you can see that nitrogen did promote panicle weight a little better. So that was where we think the yield advantages was coming in. And so by putting down the mid-season, we did get a yield advantage. But I think the 45 is probably the one that would be the most likely one that a farmer would want to continue to utilize, because there wasn't much difference between the 45 and the 90 in terms of panicle weight or yield difference, but it was greater than the control. I would say that there was no lodging that we could see out in the field. With the mid-season treatments, we did see that there was a height advantage. The plants did get along, and it delayed their maturity a couple of weeks, which is probably not all that unusual. And for yield for zone 1, 2, and 3 bushels per acre, you could see that for row rice, it was 159 and 160, well, let's say 3, and then 174 for zone 3, which had the tailwater accumulation. So we still have issues with trying to figure out the timing of the water and the frequency of the water applications. That seems to be the biggest single thing limiting our yields. What we did different is we kept it as a flat bed, and we put the poly pipe along the edge, ran the water down more like a flood system. And we found that that's working better than making some slightly raised beds because the water would race through the field a little fast, at least on the sill loam soils. And so this was slowing down the water and allowing more water infiltration to get down into it and then come up into the wide beds. They were like 38-inch wide beds. And so we still got a lot of work to do on just trying to figure out the water timing, frequency of the irrigation, as well as what is the best bed design. Now, Dr. Gene Stevens at Delta Center is working on that aspect of the bed width and bed design. You will see some of that data here in a second. Now, we did do a water study. Water is, as I mentioned with the irrigation study, important to us. So there are United States Geologic Survey wells across the Blue Hill. There's like 8 or 9 of them. And we measure each one. And what they tell us is the depth. And what we see in every single one is that we see that there is a drawdown during the main irrigation season. And then during winter, because of base flow and water infiltration through the unconfined aquifer, you get a return of the water table depths. And so what it points out to is some of these data go back a longer period of time, but I just kept the data a little shorter over a period of a couple, 200 months, is that we've never had a water overdraft that extended into the following irrigation season. On all of the wells, and many of them are in rice producing counties, we have not seen an aquifer overdraft issue in the state of Missouri. That doesn't mean that we won't in the future. We just haven't seen it yet. And so we're continuing to look and monitor the groundwater availability and the quality of the groundwater. We know that there's some issues with water quality in the groundwater. It's just that no one has done a comprehensive study of groundwater quality in the southeastern Missouri, except on a few minor locations. So right now, because of the water study, water quality is becoming more important to us than is water quantity. But that does not mean that we won't have issues with water quantity in the future. And we still look at water conserving projects. Now, we did do a climate change study, and we came up with some conclusions. We do want to do improvements in irrigation technology to conserve groundwater resource. That's very important to us. Now, we did also working on furrow irrigation, or row rice, will reduce methane emissions in rice. We've kind of had some data to show that. However, nitrous oxide emissions will likely increase as the nitrification cycle becomes synchronous with the water application cycle. What we're finding is as we do the furrow irrigation during the water application, any nitrates are denitrified. And then when it begins to dry down before the next cycle of water application, we will get some ammonium conversion into nitrate, preparing for the next cycle of denitrification. We're looking at agrotane and other urease inhibitors, as well as some looking at trying to inhibit nitrification. There's a lot of interest in the Missouri Blue Hill for that. Rice breeding programs. We have to continue delivering high nighttime tolerant cultivars. We've had a few hot days where during Anthus, and then we see that we're shooting some blanks. And we feel that if the climate is such that it gets warmer, that we're going to see increased issues with high nighttime temperatures. And so breeding varieties that are more tolerant is important to us. As furrow irrigation continues to expand, rice breeding programs must continue to develop cultivars better suited for this irrigation practice, including yield stability. When we put a lot of different varieties out there on row rice, we definitively saw that there was a huge yield difference when compared with traditional delayed flood. And so some varieties do very well with row rice, other varieties not so well. And also the influence on chalk and rice quality, and we need better disease packages, including for blast. And we also, from our climate study, we looked at research investment and producer-oriented financial support for enhancing soil carbon. The idea is that across much of Missouri, there's been a great interest in doing things like putting in cover crops and so forth, but that has not been highly significant in the Missouri Blue Hill. Part of that is because the farms are bigger And seed costs for some of the cover crops are pretty pricey, and everybody's counting their pennies nowadays. So that is something that we have to look at as long-term enhancement. We do want a region-wide assessment plan for estimating the current groundwater abundance and water quality, especially the water quality, and estimate future aquifer withdrawal rates based on current acceptance of conservation farming practices. One of the things we're finding is that if there is a global warming associated with climate change, the studies have shown that Missouri's corn acreage will probably decrease, whereas rice acreage will then increase. The assessment plan must include infrastructure developments for surplus water capture, wetland preservation, irrigation technology for the efficient application of water, and for each of the major crops and anticipated harvested land area changes because of markets and any climate change. So climate change is something that we're taking seriously, and we're just planning for the future. We are developing a program of unmanned aerial vehicles equipped with remote sensing technology. Southeast Missouri will provide the hardware. We have new drones with heavy lift capacity, and we have acquired hyperspectral cameras and other kinds of remote sensing instrumentation to put on a UAV. And then the University of Missouri will do the data analysis. And the whole concept is to create a real-time assessment back to the farmer. And so if you fly a drone on Tuesday, we want the information back in the farmer's hand on Wednesday, so with an interpretation of how they can do real-time alternative management features to increase their yield, at least in portions of the field that are showing stress. We have flown a lot of UAV using thermal imaging. We have also started looking at things for infrared. And so we are finding that pieces of a field will show up stress. Other pieces of the fields are fairly excellent. And yet, when you look at it with the human eye, it all looks similar. And so we are finding that the UAV, coupled with the correct remote sensing technologies, can provide us with some real-time information to make corrections. And lastly, we're looking at cloud-based information systems where we're trying to receive data from tractor implements to create an innovative field management databases for yield and crop quality realization. For instance, we at our university farm work with Climate Corp, and we send information from the implements off of our tractors to the cloud, and we're getting back information reports that we can use to improve our practices. And so we think informatics is going to be a very important thing in rice production, as with all row crop production. And so we want to get into the beginning of that. Right now, the private sector is quite a bit ahead of us in academia, at least in Missouri. Now, we did do variety trials, quite a few of them. Well, we had variety trials. We had 6 sites early and also where we planted early and we planted later. Trying to look at planting dates as well as looking at the lodging associated that. We had 6 sites. This is the 2019 data. We're trying to get the milling data now for 2020. And you can see that the 6 sites, there's quite a few varieties that were evaluated, and we were getting some predictable data. These are the average of the 6 trials. By the way, all of this data is available on our Rice website I'll talk about in a second. Yeah, virtual rice field day. Like everybody, we had to go to a virtual field day, which is normally in August. And what we did this year is we produced videos. We did that with the help of the private sector, and they're available at MissouriRice.com. And the Missouri Rice Council decided that they want to do videos, even if we get through COVID-19 and it goes away, they still want videos because of the comments they got back from the farmers. And so these are available to view by producers at their leisure. And so we featured row rice. We did nitrogen management of furrow irrigated rice with Dr. Gene Stevens and his graduate student, Joanna Nelson. Joanna Nelson, also working with Dr. Gene Stevens, did furrow irrigated rice beds, talking about how to make the different row rice beds and how they performed. Dr. Christian de Guzman did rice breeding, and Dr. Dave Reinbott did the market outlook for rice. And Dr. Jim Heiser, he's a weed scientist at Fisher Delta Research Center, did a total residual grass control study for herbicide effectiveness. And so all of that information is available by going to MissouriRice.com. We are upgrading our website for Missouri Rice. So it is coming along quite nicely. The Missouri Rice Research Demonstration Farm, there's something unique in Missouri. The Missouri Rice Research Farm is completely owned and operated by the Missouri Rice Research Merchandising Council. And it is our understanding that no other major research facility in the central U.S. is farmer owned and managed. Thus, all rice research is farmer supported, farmer directed, farmer evaluated on farmer owned property. The University of Missouri Fisher Delta Research Center in Southeast Missouri have been longtime research partners with the farm, but it is owned and operated by the Missouri rice farmers through their elected members in the Rice Council. So that's a kind of a unique attribute. Now, Missouri Rice Research Merchandising Council activities. Missouri, we have initiated OPAA. It stands for something, I'm not sure what it is. But it is a school lunch service provider enabling rice to become a key component of school lunch and breakfast programs across Missouri and 5 other states. So the Rice Council provides the rice, and rice is then produced with various menus, trying to get younger people to enjoy rice, getting a culture of eating rice. And it is both for lunch and breakfast programs. And it's not just Missouri, it's also 5 other states, mostly to the north of Missouri and to the west of Missouri. And most of the school lunch programs are in western Missouri, Kansas City area. The council works with the Missouri legislature to support September as Rice Month. A lot of outreach opportunities. The Rice Council supports the growing of rice at the St. Louis Science Center. If you don't know what the St. Louis Science Center is, it's a fairly big complex to promote science education across the state of Missouri as well as to the public. There are over 1 million visitors annually, and they have put in the Grow exhibit. And within the Grow exhibit, which will also feature things like wine operations across Missouri, cotton, and so forth, there is rice. And we actually grow rice there. Public can come up and see the rice growing. The Missouri Rice Council, the farmers have days that they go there and they talk to the public. And it's trying to promote public awareness that Missouri actually does grow rice, coupled with the fact that farmers are excellent people. We supported a trade mission to Morocco to export rice to Morocco, and we've developed research linkages with Egypt. A little note about Egypt. Egypt is first time in their 7,000-year history are moving in food insecurity. Part of it is population increase. They have 1 million babies every 10 months. It's also, the country is 100 million people. And the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia is cutting off 30% of their water coming down the Nile. And therefore, their agriculture is going to take a major hit. Now, Missouri issues. This is a tough one for me. I am the only rice researcher in the state of Missouri. There have been fiscal issues with the state that has impacted my university, Southeast Missouri State. It has also impacted the land-grant university, the University of Missouri. Okay. So not only am I the only rice researcher in the state of Missouri, there is no extension personnel in the state of Missouri with experience in rice and cotton. Many of you may be familiar with the Fisher Delta Research Center. They no longer have a cotton breeder. They have no one in cotton. They no longer have an irrigation specialist. They do have USDA ARS with Voorhees, but no one from the University of Missouri. They lost their plant pathologist, they lost their entomologist, and basically they have Dr. Jim Heiser doing the rice weed science across all of the commodities. We lost our rice breeder. He took an opportunity to work at the University of Arkansas. We wish him the best. He's a great rice breeder. It's a great opportunity for him. We wish him all the best. So Missouri does not know yet if it will continue its rice breeding program. We do desire to do the URN in Missouri, but probably with no lines coming from Missouri. But we do want to support the rice breeding efforts across the rice belt. So we will probably convert a lot of the research done in rice to agronomic research, which we always have done. But that will probably take front stage with the possibility the rice breeding program will not continue. We are looking at and have some success with getting private sector research at the rice farm. We're talking with several private research entities to start putting plots in their research activities with the Missouri Rice Research Farm. And we are developing multiple social media avenues to support rice in terms of branding and marketing. We've contracted with the private sector. Missouri Rice is now on Facebook, but we're also doing other things with other social media avenues. Now, we are looking for faculty research partnerships. We think we have the beginnings of a great program in remote sensing with or without the drone systems. We do want to do more in irrigation technology. The only irrigation people in the state of Missouri currently are USDA ARS folks, and we thank them for being with us, but we need to do a lot more. We're looking at maybe a belt-wide Delta Regional Authority grant. We do want to promote information sharing. We would like Arkansas, Louisiana, and so forth to give us permission to put links to their research on our research site and vice versa. And we're looking at international interactions. And when I was in Egypt, we were well received, very well received, actually. They have an excellent agricultural infrastructure for research. They have some of the highest yields in the world, and yet they're going to run out of water. And so when I was at the embassy, they said there's going to be a lot of USAID money for Egypt, and therefore it's kind of there for the picking. And so we're looking at working with Egypt on a research linkages. And then there's other things we can have faculty research partnerships with. We value partnerships simply because they seem to leverage the strengths across a wider variety of opportunities. And so that's a good thing, we think. So, what questions do you have?
So, Michael, I'm going to ask the first one. You talked quite a bit about furrow irrigated row rice. Do you have an idea what percentage of the rice in Missouri is grown under furrow irrigation?
Yeah, but we did have a talk about that, and it seems like it's now around 20%. But the 5-6 years ago, it was kind of like it first kind of started, but now farmers really like it. I think talking to the producers, when they look at row rice, they're looking at the farm profitability over the life of the rotation. And that seems to be a selling point for them because it also assists them when they're doing a rotation with the levee creations and so forth. They really don't care about the water conservation because that's not an issue. We do realize that it is an issue in other places. That's a substantial issue. But in Missouri, that's not the issue, but it comes right down to looking at the life of the rotation with putting up the levees, that kind of thing, and the management of it. Row rice just seems to be gaining a lot of producer acceptance. I asked them, do they use surge valves, and half of them love them and half of them hate them. So that seems to be based on your experience for them working or not working. But there is a lot of interest in row rice. It's new. I think what's going to start spurring it even more is I think now you're getting crop insurance capabilities. And so there is a lot of interest in row rice. It's probably the biggest single issue that people are looking at. And yet we've seen that there's some varieties that do very well in row rice and some that just don't do well in row rice at all. But we haven't seen a whole lot of published information on which ones they are.
So we do have a
multi-year
question.
Study on that, actually.
We do have a question from the audience. What do you think the rice acreage will be in 2021? Do you expect Missouri rice acreage to increase next year or decrease if soy, corn prices stay high?
I think what it will be is I think it will be about like this year in that it'll be over 200,000. But you have to remember that a lot of the acreage that people wanted to put into rice in 2020 didn't get put in rice because of the heavy spring rains. Should that repeat, I think it'll be about the same as last year, even with some heavy spring rain. But so, yeah, other crops are regaining some market strength. Now, I'm not an economist, but it's pretty obvious that some of these crops are going to rebound.
So I recall many years ago when I was at LSU, there was some row rice grown, getting back to row rice, furrow irrigated rice. There was some row rice grown in Missouri in the 80s. There was a kind of like experimentation and it kind of went away. So what are your thoughts on that? Why did it go away and why all of a sudden has it come back?
Oh, why did it come back? Well, first of all, it'll come back a lot stronger if we ever figure out how to actually manage the nitrogen. That's still a problem for us, as well as actually figuring out the water management side of it. I think some farmers compensate by adding a little more nitrogen, but hopefully that it doesn't cause lodging. but it was, why did it come back? I think it would just harm profitability.
I know that in a lot of areas where row rice has grown, certainly anytime you change production systems, you have new issues that show up. And one of the issues that's shown up in row rice is bill bugs. Do y'all have problems with bill bugs in Missouri?
I'm not going to say we don't, but it's like sheath blight, we just don't really get it. We'll get blast, but you know, sheath blight, we just don't get a lot of.
Thank you, Michael. Do we have any additional questions from the audience?
But I think we're in survival mode. And we're looking at strategies for excellence for the future. And yet we know we're in a survival mode because we don't think Missouri is going to come out of its economic woes for some time in the future.
Great. Thank you, Michael, for an excellent presentation. Again, we do want to thank Riceland Foods for their sponsorship of the Missouri Rice Research and Outlook report this morning. Want to remind everyone that we will have the Texas report later on this morning at 10 o'clock Central Time. And also we will have the California report tomorrow afternoon. That'll be at 1:30 Pacific Time or 3:30 Central Time. So with that, we appreciate everyone participating in the Missouri reports today. And again, we appreciate Riceland Foods helping us with their sponsorship of the Missouri reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you.